In February 2019, the Democratic National Committee revealed the qualification criteria for the first two Democratic presidential debates. Candidates needed to receive at least 1% in 3 different DNC-approved polls, or have received campaign contributions from 65,000 donors. Historically, at the beginning of past election cycles, the DNC would base debate qualification only on polling, but this election cycle was different as there ended up being 24 candidates all trying to qualify for the first debate. And as new debates were announced, so were new qualification requirements. For example, with the third debate, the polling criterion was raised from 1% to 2%, and the required number of individual donors doubled from 65,000 to 130,000 donors. And from here on, candidates needed to meet both polling and donor thresholds. Several candidates like New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, Congressman Tim Ryan, Senator Michael Bennet, and Bill from King of the Hill didn't meet either the new polling or fundraising thresholds. In short, if you can't score 2% on a single DNC-approved poll, that means that you're never going to be the Democratic nominee. So fast forward to November 2019, when former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg announced that he was running for the Democratic nomination. Within the span of 6 weeks, he met the polling threshold for the 7th debate, but not the donor threshold. And that's because Bloomberg, the 9th richest person in the world, was self-funding his run for the presidency and not accepting donations to his campaign. Bloomberg wrote in a CNN op-ed, "People often ask me, why aren't you into debates? It's simple. The party requires candidates to have a certain amount of donations, but I've never accepted a nickel from anyone. I hope the DNC changes its rules. I'd gladly participate, but I'm not going to change my principles." On January 28th, Politico published an article reporting that Adam Green of the Progressive Change Campaign Committee and a surrogate of Elizabeth Warren approached the DNC in December and proposed altering the rules so that Bloomberg would be included in future debates. And on the same day, Senator Amy Klobuchar appeared on Morning Joe and had the same sentiment.
Do you think Mike Bloomberg should be on the debate stages going forward?
I'd be fine with him being on the debate stage because I think that instead of just putting your money out there, he's actually got to be on the stage and be able to go back and forth so that voters can evaluate him in that way.
And that's a good point. Until Bloomberg is able to participate in any of the debates, it's going to be a one-sided argument.
Why do you think you are better positioned than Bloomberg to beat Trump, Senator Warren?
Look, I don't think anyone ought to be able to buy their way into a nomination or to be president of the United States.
He needs to be on that stage because we all want to see if Elizabeth Warren is bold enough to say that to his fucking face. Shouldn't the Democrats be given the opportunity to challenge a man who will likely spend over $1 billion on the 2020 election cycle? Well, they just might get that opportunity because on January 31st, the DNC announced a criteria for entry into the Nevada debate. To qualify for the 9th debate in Nevada, you would need to get 10% in 4 polls or 12% in 2 early state polls. And without that donor threshold, this opened the door for Bloomberg to participate in the debates going forward. And some people weren't happy about it.
They are removing the rule to be on the debate stage where it says you have to have so many people donating to you. Otherwise, instead of 27 people on the stage, there'd be 227 people on the stage. So you had to show that you had to have a certain number of Americans that would give you a buck. Today, they removed that rule because Mike Bloomberg, the billionaire, the Republican mayor of New York City.
Removes me nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
They removed it so that he could be in the next debate. He doesn't have to show he has any support amongst the American people.
Well, that's not true because they're still using polling as a qualifier.
And the fact that the DNC will not allow Cory Booker on that stage, will not allow Julian Castro on that stage.
Well, Cory Booker and Julian Castro both dropped out of the race because their polling sucked, but I'll talk about that in a second.
But they're gonna allow Mike Bloomberg on the stage because he's got $1 billion.
The accusation that the DNC changed the rules for Bloomberg isn't completely unfounded, as Bloomberg made 3 separate donations totaling more than $300,000 to the DNC back in November 2019. To the general public and to supporters of the other candidates, it sure looks like it could be corruption. At best, it's probably just really poor optics.
No, I think it is an outrage. Look, rules are rules.
But sometimes rules are meant to be broken. For example, Bernie touts himself to be the longest serving independent member of Congress in American history and identifies as a Democratic socialist. But when he runs for president, suddenly he's a Democrat, but I digress.
And people like Julian Castro, played by the rules, campaigned really hard. Cory Booker, played by the rules. Tulsi Gabbard, played by the rules. Andrew Yang, played by the rules. Based on the rules determined by the DNC, they were unable to participate in one or more debates.
So, a couple things to unpack here. First, the DNC never stated that the qualification requirements were set in stone. Instead, they were subject to change every time that new debates were announced. Second, Castro, Booker, Gabbard, and Yang were all able to meet the donor threshold. What kept them off the debate stage at various points was their very low polling numbers. As an example, Castro failed to qualify for the 5th debate because while he met the donor threshold of 165,000 donors, he failed to hit the required minimum of 3% in at least 4 polls. In fact, he only scored 2% in 2 out of 32 polls. In December 2019, Booker, along with 8 other candidates, signed a letter urging the DNC to consider alternative qualification standards so that Booker and Castro could make the debate stage in January and February. But Reed J. Epstein of the New York Times reported that DNC Chairman Tom Perez had already decided that candidates would be required to reach both donor and polling thresholds, not one or the other, as Booker's letter requested. And even if Booker was able to get back on the debate stage, his polling average hovered around 2%. And if you can't get higher than a 2% average after 5 debate appearances, that's an indicator that voters have made up their mind about you. And the fact that all of these other Democrats signed a letter to keep Booker in the debates is absurd. But I'm sure you can guess why they did. While we know that this was an unintended consequence of the DNC's actions, many of the candidates excluded due to these thresholds are the ones who helped make this year's primary field historically diverse. The rules were only a problem when Booker and Castro weren't able to qualify. I mean, you didn't see anyone begging the DNC to change the rules for Beto O'Rourke because, well, you know. Besides, changing the rules so that Booker or Castro could make the debate stage a few more times would have only delayed the inevitable. They were lackluster candidates who were going to have to drop out eventually. Also, if the DNC changed the rules so that Booker could make the debate stage based only on him meeting the donor threshold, then that would have opened a door for Marianne Williamson, and there was no way that the DNC was going to let that happen. In response to Booker's request, the DNC said in a statement to The Hill that once voting starts in February, our criteria will reflect those contests, which is more than appropriate. And that brings us back to January 2020. When the DNC dropped the donor requirement for the debates going forward, they introduced a delegate threshold. For the Nevada debate, if a candidate receives a single pledged delegate from either Iowa or New Hampshire, they automatically get a spot on the stage. And that means that despite their current low polling averages, Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar may have secured a spot on the Nevada debate stage. And I say may have secured a spot because I'm basing that on projections because it's been 5 days since the Iowa caucuses and we still haven't been given the full results. But that's a video for another time. And in the meantime, for those of you worried that billionaire Bloomberg is somehow going to buy his way into the White House, well, let me show you an example of where he's spending his money.
Lie, unfair, lie, lie,
And this goes on for 2.5 minutes. Who thought that this was a good idea? If anything, it's definitive proof that the left does not know how to meme. Anyway, thanks for stopping by, and be sure that you're registered to vote. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. As always, I hope to see you all next time.